Hello, so I promised a guide this tier, and therefore I will be making a guide this tier. A little bit later than I first intended because I ended up being really busy with preparing for progression and stuff, but here it is. There will be timestamps in description and probably like chapters on the video if you want something in particular. Don't know how long this video is going to be, so if you already are confident in certain things, definitely check out the timestamps. Let's get into it. So, burning question, Covenants. Let's start there. As you can probably tell by the background, I picked Necrolord. The four options, of course, being Necrolord, Kyrian, Venthyr, and Night Fae. Honestly, if you have a preference gameplay-wise, every Covenant is pretty close. My personal least favorite is Night Fae because it's the least adaptable, but it's very good on single target. My favorite is Necrolord, partly because it's just like the most fun, and also because it's the best in raid and on multidot. But for pure AoE, Venthyr and Kyrian actually could be better. So if you're strictly a dungeon player, you may want to try one of those. If you're strictly a raid player, maybe even Night Fae could work. But the real answer is that they're all really close, and if you like one in particular, there's no issue picking that one. While we're on the topic of Covenants, the best Soulbind, or Conduit, whatever they're called, is Call of Flame. It is best by a lot. Like, it's generally not even close, and then the second one you want to pick for potency is almost always going to be the one that your Covenant gives you. I think the only one where this might not be the case is Venthyr, but every single other one, I believe the Conduit your Covenant gives you is the second best. Like for us Necrolords, that would be Tumbling Waves. And for Kyrian, it would be the one that gives you damage on single target on your totem and stuff. But the best one by far is still Call of Flames. Put that one in first, as soon as you get it. Next up, let's talk about stats. Stats are one of those things that I'm going to be doing a little differently in this guide than normal, because I simply don't think that stats are something that I can really give you an actual answer for. Different legendaries, different covenants, all these things affect your stats. And if I give you a number, that would be dishonest, and I think it would be misleading, so I'm going to show you how to get the answer yourself instead. So first thing you want to do is get the Simcraft add-on from whatever add-on you use. Log into the game, put on whatever talents or whatever you want. If you're running this build, then you put this on. Put on any gear you have in your bags will work here. Even if you have the Great Vault, you can open the Great Vault and do this, and it'll include the Great Vault items. Type /SIMC in your chat. Open this up, copy it, go to raidbots.com and use Top Gear, paste your SimC in there, and you can pick any item you have in your bags or Great Vault, and you can, like, you know, if you want to check out these shoulders, see if they're good, maybe the socket's better here, you know, see this trinket, and, you know, that gloves or whatever. You can go down here, you can even check in different enchants, different gems, different conduits. You can unlock every soulbind and every conduit to like try things you don't even have yet. You can try the different covenant stuff too. And you can even pick talent. You can try Echoing Shock and Ice Fury if you want. And then change, you know, single target, multiple targets, fight duration, and changing of bloodlust and stuff. And then you just hit Top Gear. Let it sim. It goes pretty fast for me because I have premium, but it may take a little longer. Same accuracy though. And boom, you got your best stuff. For me, I already had my best stuff equipped, but I want to enchant my bracers, which apparently I haven't done yet. Yeah, I haven't enchanted my bracers yet apparently, but yeah, I want to be enchant my bracers and I want to be to switch to Ice Fury for the best single target damage there. Now, we'll talk about the talent in a little bit, but that is how you can find your best items, especially for raid. Mythic Plus things get a little more complicated, and you might want to do something like a single target sim and an AoE sim and kind of weigh your options manually. But for stats and stuff, this is definitely how I find my own stats. I don't think stat weights are very good personally, so I use Top Gear and just sim every item individually. Next up, let's talk about legendaries. Elemental Shaman is a spec that is pretty unique in the sense that it has a lot of options with legendaries. Most specs have only one or two. Ellie has quite a few. So looking at legendaries here, the ones that I would consider a real option for competitive gameplay are Skybreaker's Fiery Demise, Echoes of the Great Sundering, and Windspeaker's Law of Resurgence. There are some other things you can use for fun, like Chains of Devastation might be fun for, you know, zero healing, a Mythic Plus or something. This is also not bad, but I think it has too much RNG and requires too much uptime to really be good. Elemental Equilibrium is decent all around if you're looking for one that you can just use anywhere. But then again, so is something like Skybreakers and Echoes. But talking about these main three options, Windspeakers, Echoes, and Skybreakers, Windspeaker's Law of Resurgence is by far the best on single target right now. Like, so much so that it might even get nerfed at some point. If the tooltip here does not look like the tooltip in game, and you're watching this, not right around Christmas time, it is possible it got nerfed and may need to be resimmed. But as it stands, this is quite a bit above the others in single target, but any additional targets, and it loses value because you will not be wanting to cast Earthshock as much if there are multiple targets nearby, of course. Skybreakers, in my opinion, is the most well-rounded, because you can benefit from this in dungeons by multi-dotting, and on single target it's just about equal to Echoes of the Great Sundering, and on actual multi-dot it's really good for helping you do funnel damage because you have Firely up every minute or so, and Firely makes you proc a lot more, and you can funnel all that damage into one target. It's very good. And Echoes of the Great Sundering allows you to cast a very beefy Earthquake after every Earthshock, but it does still cost Maelstrom. However, the duration has been buffed from beta. I don't know if you have all played this before, but it used to be 15 seconds long and it was really hard to get the Earthquake out. Now it's 25 seconds, so you can actually pool this going into an extra trash pack or something on Mythic Plus. So this legendary is, in my opinion, the best one in Mythic Plus, and good for certain fights in the raid, like maybe Kael'thas, the Sun King, for example. I do think overall this legendary is a little overrated because I think a lot of the damage it's doing is kind of pad damage, in raid at least. And in Mythic Plus, it is very useful, but so is Skybreakers. So if you're just a Mythic Plus player, Echoes might be the best option for you. If you're kind of an everything player, Skybreakers is probably the best option. That's the one I crafted, personally. And then if you are a raid player, Windspeaker is probably the best option. I would have crafted Windspeakers for raid, but it wasn't out yet because of the legendary world boss. And make sure you kill the world boss when it spawns in Bastion, because that is where this comes from. And if you miss it, you have to wait another month to get it. But that is my take on the legendaries. I will link in the description. There are bonus IDs. If you know how to sim this kind of stuff, you can put that bonus ID on the end of any item. It will allow you to sim as if you have the legendary effect. So you can check different legendaries versus each other if you really want to know which one is best in different sim things. But that's kind of an advanced thing, so if you're not sure how to do that, probably just take based on your own judgment. At this point, if you do Torghast every week, you can kind of have them all anyway. But that is my take on legendaries. Now let's talk about talents. Talents are a fairly controversial topic for Elemental Shaman right now. Similar to legendaries, there are a lot of options and they're all good at different things. This right here is the highest simming single target option. However, it is really hard to play and incredibly punishing. So if you're not super confident in what you're doing, I would recommend playing something different. It's just the mix of Ice Fury and Elemental Blast and Master of the Element includes so much things you have to juggle. And if you mess up one time, you could lose a ton of damage by it spiraling out of control. So for a really experienced player, this could be really good. But even personally myself, I played this for prog with Echoing Shock instead of Elemental Blast because it sims only like 1% lower. It is so much easier to handle. But even this is still quite challenging, and we'll get into that more in the rotation part of the guide. But if you're a really inexperienced player, you could try something more like this and only lose another couple percent of damage from optimal play. I think that most people playing Ice Fury is actually losing damage because of how challenging it is. So I think for the majority of players, playing something like this with Echoing Shock Primal Elementalist or even Elemental Blast Primal Elementalist would be a damage increase until you get a lot more comfortable with the spec. Sometimes going with the top sims can be a trap, and I think this kind of build is one of those cases. That is for raid specifically. For Mythic Plus, you want to be playing Primal in pretty much every key. If you aren't sure, then just play Primal. And then Elemental Blast is actually really good, especially on Tyrannical weeks. I went into a key and accidentally played Elemental Blast and ended up liking it a lot, and now I play it every key. Aftershock can also be really good, especially if you have Echoes of the Great Sundering Legendary. And Elemental Blast is also really good with that because it generates a lot of Maelstrom. Echoing Shock is kind of like this weird mix between AoE and single target. I liked it at first, but the more I played with it, the more I felt like Elemental Blast was just the same thing but better in keys. So personally, I only play either of these two now in keys, Aftershock or Elemental Blast. Echo of the Elements is kind of an always take this, never don't take Echo of the Elements. I think as it stands, Master of the Elements is also something you should never not take. I don't think Stormily has any use right now. Partly because you just don't have enough secondary stats to really support it, and we also don't have any perks when you go for that, like the leveling perks you get. We got some passes from leveling, and they only benefit virally, so you just lose those and you don't get anything back. And also Stormkeeper is also just you always take this. So the only real option here is Elemental Blast Aftershock. And if you're doing a really high tyrannical, Spires of Ascension or something, Ice Fury is also an option, but I think if you If this isn't an option, or if it's not something you know exactly when to take, I would recommend just always taking Primal. Because it's never going to be much worse. It'll always be very close, at worst. But if you pick Ice Fury in the wrong situation, you'll lose a lot of damage. So this is my personal build, but Aftershock is also really good. Either of these work. Now let's talk about the fun stuff. The rotation. So the way I'm going to do this is a little bit different than what you're probably used to. I'm going to quickly go over some of the important parts of the rotation, and then I'm just going to open up one of my kill videos and show you what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I think that might be a little easier to digest, I'm hoping. The important parts of the rotation are basically keep flame check on the whatever main target it is, or any targets nearby, up to like, I think it was 4 targets. If you're playing Necrolord and also Skybreakers, you can kind of multi-dot even more than that. You start using Earthquake instead of Earthshock at 2 targets. You start using Chain Lightning instead of Lightning Bolt at 3 targets. And your priority for Master of the Elements should be Earthquake at more than 1 target, Lightning Bolt with Stormkeeper Empowerment, or if you're Night Fae for some reason, Fae Transfusion, First Shock, Empowered Frost Shocks from Ice Fury, and then honestly nothing, because it's more worth it to just cast 11 bursts in a row than to empower any of these spells. However, use Ice Fury and cooldown, even if you're going to empower it, it doesn't matter that much. Don't worry about trying to not Master of the Elements Ice Fury. The main thing you're going to be worrying about in the rotation is keeping Flame Shock on the boss, keeping Lava Burst on cooldown as much as you can, and using Master of the Elements on the right spells. That is the complicated part. Also, if you have Elemental Blast, you should be using that on cooldown as well, like as much as possible. Don't even worry about trying to master the elements. Elemental Blast, just use it on cooldown. If it happens, it happens. But in the other part of the rotation guide, we're going to be looking into maximizing Master of the Elements, because that is the part that makes... And that's the part that separates the good and the bad. So let's open that up real quick. So this is my Hungering Destroyer kill on week 1 of Mythic. I was playing the Ice Fury Master of the Elements and Echoing Shock build that I talked about. And of course Necrolord, like I also mentioned. So I'm going to watch part of this kill video with you and kind of tell you the decision making in my opener and things like that as we go. So I precast my trinket because it takes 15 seconds and it is more efficient that way. Anyways, I start casting Stormkeeper at around 4. That's when I have enough time to get it off. Precast Lava Burst into a Flame Shock. And then I use Primordial Wave. Actually, I use Fire Lily, then Primordial Wave. Now, part of the reason I've used Primordial Wave right here, and not, well, the only reason I use Primordial Wave here instead of after the Lava Burst is because the travel time on Primordial Wave is slower than the Lava Burst. So you will not have Flame Shock on the boss when the Lava Burst lands, so you need to Flame Shock first. I use this as an opportunity to get my Flame Shock increased by using Fire Lily first. So I Lava Burst, Flame Shock to get in the crit, Fire Lily, and then Primordial Wave to get a very long Flame Shock. Also with Ameni, with the Soulbind, you get Intellect when you use Primordial Wave, and I get to use that right before my Stormkeeper charge. After the Stormkeeper charge, which is right after Primordial Wave, I then use Echoing Shock, Love Burst, Stormkeeper charge again. As you can see here. Next I use Ice Fury to get on cooldown and Earth Shock because it's going to overcap, and now is when the fun stuff starts. So now is when I'm really juggling Master of the Elements outside of the opener. It's no longer scripted. I have to actually think. Very first one I used on Frost Shock, just because I still have 4 Frost Shocks. Didn't have enough Maelstrom to use Earth Shock. I start using Frost Shocks. I stop and cast a Lightning Bolt here, because I have a ton of time, and I only have 2 Frost Shocks left. I wanted to empower these if I could. So I decided to use Lightning Bolt just to save enough, or just to save the charges for later in case I can Master the Elements on them. Now here I'm thinking, I don't know why I didn't pause. That's what I was thinking. Anyways, here I'm thinking, I'm not quite capped yet. Gee, why did I Frost Shock there? Let me go back. I don't think I should have Frost Shocked there. Not really sure why I Frost Shocked there. Anyways, bad decision there. Even I make mistakes. I use a Frost Shock there, and then I cast Lava Burst because I'm not quite capped yet. Lava Burst is coming up. And then I want to Earth Shock the Master of the Elements, so I think that the reason I Frost Shock there was to kill time. Because I didn't want to overcap, so I just sent something out, but I think that was a mistake in hindsight. Lava Burst immediately Earth Shock so the Overload can't overcap me. And then I try to kill some time. I get a proc, which is exactly what I was looking for. Instead of casting that Frost Shock, I use Lightning Bolt, got the proc that I was looking for, and now I can empower the Frost Shock as well. Now I have enough time to cast more spells, another Lightning Bolt, before using Earth Shock, and then I have Lava Burst up without overcapping it, and I can empower the Earth Shock. As you can see, there's a lot of thought going into this, and a lot of thinking ahead. You got to think ahead multiple globals to play this build effectively. Now, there's nothing really going on anymore because I don't have any, Ice Fury charges or anything going. Here, I actually purposely didn't use Spirit Wise Grace and cast Lava Burst there because I had Echoing Shock coming up, and I want to Echoing Shock the Lava Burst. That is the highest priority single target spell, not Earth Shock. Clarify. So instead of using Spirit Wise Grace here, I just kind of ran out until Echoing Shock was up, used that, and then cast Lava Burst afterwards. Now I can Ice Fury again, into a Lava Burst, into an Earth Shock, and then use some Frost Shock charges to get back into melee. I started casting Lightning Bolt there before I got the proc, so you could consider that a misplay, but I didn't really realize I had the proc until too late. And at that point, it was better just to finish it. Now I can use the proc, empower the Frost Shock, but I used Primordial Wave first. Second Frost Shock, probably Lava Burst into Frost Shock, into Lava Burst into Earth Shock here. So I can do that without overcapping, and then I got Stormkeeper up. Empower the first Stormkeeper charge. Might not be able to empower the second one, depending if I get a proc or not. Put a Flame Shock there. What did I do? I did Flame Shock, okay. And I used my Trinket. And empower that, and then this Earth Shock started running out, so I got Echoing Shock next to Lava Burst. Kind of the same thing that I used Ferocious Grace on the way back in. Because I wanted to kill time without casting the Echoing Shock. So I just kind of ran out, Echoing Shock, Lava Burst. Empowered Ice Fury there, but again, that's totally fine to empower an Ice Fury. If you have something higher priority, do that instead, but without anything else, just empower it. And I want to go back and look at how many Frost Shocks I empowered there, because I want to emphasize that it's completely fine not to empower all your Frost Shocks, as long as you get them all out. If you lose a Frost Shock, that is losing way more damage than not empowering one. I use Ice Fury here, I immediately use a Frost Shock because I'm moving. Frost Shock again, so I can get to the Lava Burst, because it was coming off cooldown. And then I Frost Shocked again, which I probably didn't have to do. But I'm only overcapping by 1, which is fine. I can Lava Burst into an Earth Shock immediately so the Overload doesn't cap me. Lava Burst again into a Frost Shock. Now I'm kind of focusing on mechanics and not worrying about hitting the boss right now. I have to move anyway, so I'm getting into Spirit Link and stuff. I have Primordial Wave coming up and Echoing Shock coming up, so I have to make sure to use these in the correct order, which is to not echo the Primordial Wave. Use Primordial Wave first, and then echoing, then you can do a big beefy Lava Burst. I also have Fire Lake coming up too. Actually, Lava Burst first. I should have Echoing Shock before that, but I was focusing on mechanics and just didn't notice. I delayed this Echoing Shock a lot longer than I should have. Here's another Ice Fury window. Use the first mote on the Earth Shock. Lava Burst into a Frost Shock probably. Lava Burst again. Oh, there's a refreshing Flame Shock there, that's also fine. So I kind of ran out of time. And I also had Stormkeeper coming up. So I just sent out the Frost Shock so I could cast Stormkeeper, ASAP. I had to move over here. Could have Earth Shocked on the way, but I didn't. Empower the Earth Shock. Running out again. A lot of mechanics going on, really disrupting me there. Yeah, I get to empower both these Stormkeeper charges all as well. We Ice Fury into an Earth Shock here, and then Echoing Shock the next Lava Burst. That is exactly what I did. Yeah, I think that I don't think I need to watch this whole video. I think that kind of covers it. You're basically juggling not losing stacks. I'll keep playing the video for you while I talk. You're juggling not losing Ice Fury stacks, not losing Stormkeeper stacks, not overcapping Maelstrom, with empowering the most important things you can. If you're not very experienced and you want to just get used to the build first, what I recommend is just replacing Lightning Bolt with Frost Shock. And if you're running out of time, just prioritize Frost Shock over anything else. Specifically Ice Fury empowered Frost Shock, not just any Frost Shock. Once you use Ice Fury, you just use Lava Burst over that, use Earth Shock over that, and then when you otherwise would be casting Lightning Bolt, you just cast Ice Fury Frost Shock instead. If you get really experienced, like I have been, you can instead, use Lightning Bolt instead of the Frost Shocks when you know you have enough time and you want to empower more of them, like I did in the beginning. But that's something that you shouldn't really be doing until you're very experienced with the build. But I'm hoping that showing the gameplay like this helps you retain the information a little better than just like reading off of a list, because it's not really a rotation anymore. It's a lot more involved than just a rotation. But yeah, I think that should basically sum up the Play Shaman moat juggling situation there. Hopefully now you can understand why I recommend not adding Elemental Blast to that rotation, because that would have made it even more crazy. And if you aren't experienced, then don't even play Ice Fury and just get used to the spec playing Primal. I think that about covers what I'm going to go over in this guide. There are some things that I didn't go over that you may be wanting, so I'm going to link you to places where you can find that, such as a guide for Castle Nathria bosses. That's something that Stormwrath and Lava is currently providing, and they have a really good guide. The only thing I have about this guide that I want to potentially comment on is that some bosses say Ice Fury and don't have the option for Primal Elementalist, and I want to say that I don't agree with that. I think the Primal Elementalist is always an option. The difference is really not that big, and if you have Skybreakers, sometimes it's even worse to play Ice Fury. So if you're not that comfortable, definitely don't necessarily listen just because it says to play Ice Fury. You can still play something else and not lose much damage. But otherwise, I really like the guide, and I really recommend reading it if you're looking for a Castle Nathria guide. But yeah, I think that's it for me for this guide. Let me know if you liked the rotation thing as kind of an experiment. I did it once before, and it seemed like it went over well, so I just wanted to try a little more in depth doing it again. Thank you all for watching, and I appreciate your patience with me not being able to make this guide until later. Hopefully it still helps. I know the Covenant stuff's probably too late, but swapping Covenants isn't actually that bad. Not as bad as we thought it would be, so if you feel like you chose wrong, you can still swap and get your renown pretty quick. But again, thanks you all for watching. Like if you liked it, subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.